The city hummed with tension, like a kettle ready to whistle. It wasn't loud, just a low, constant buzz beneath the surface. On one side of town, neighborhoods gleamed with tidy lawns and quiet streets. On the other, cracked sidewalks and faded murals told stories of neglect. The air felt heavier there, thick with unspoken frustration. Protest had flickered in recent months, angry crowds holding signs, voices rising like smoke. But now, the streets were quiet again, or at least, pretending to be. Officer H had patrolled these streets for 2 decades. He wore his uniform like armor, shoulders stiff, eyes scanning for trouble. To some, he was a protector, to others, a threat. His co-workers joked about his temper, the way he'd mutter under his breath when pulling over drivers, especially black ones. "They're hiding something," he'd say, though no one ever asked why he assumed that. Complaints had been filed over the years, a shove too hard, a voice too sharp, but nothing stuck. Paperwork vanished. Witnesses backed down. The system, it seemed, had his back. At home, H lived in a small house with a chain-link fence and a lawn, chair out front. His wife called him a man who takes his job seriously. His son, a teenager, barely spoke to him. His idea of relaxation was cleaning his collection of old guns, polishing the barrels while watching cop shows where bad guys always got what they deserved. Across town, Agent C sat in a coffee shop, sipping black coffee and scribbling notes into a worn leather journal. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with a posture that screamed discipline. To the world, she was just another woman in a cardigan, but her badge and her purse told a different story. The FBI had sent her here to dig into a white supremacist group. Quietly, without headlines. They'd been smuggling weapons, recruiting online, and stirring fear. C's job was to blend in, listen, and dismantle their plans before anyone got hurt. Her days were a mix of routine and risk. She'd pose as a temp worker at a factory, catching snippets of hate-filled rants between co-workers. At night, she'd review security footage from gas stations and pawn shops, tracking suspicious transactions. But her real passion was the community center on the east side, where she volunteered twice a week. Kids called her Ms. C and leaned into her stories about how to stay safe, how to dream bigger than the streets. She never mentioned her real job. To them, she was just someone who cared. C's apartment was sparse but organized. A queen-sized bed, a wall of books on criminology, and a framed photo of her parents, both retired teachers. She'd grown up in a family that believed in justice, in fighting for what's right. That's why she'd joined the FBI, not for glory, but to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. One afternoon, as C left the grocery store with 2 bags of apples and cereal, her phone buzzed. A text from her handler. "New lead. Meet me at the docks tonight. Stay off main roads." She nodded, tossing the groceries into her sedan. Main roads meant cops, and cops meant risks. Meanwhile, Officer H was parked at a red light, drumming, his fingers on the steering wheel. Dispatch crackled. "Possible stolen vehicle heading north, blue sedan, license plate." He didn't wait for the full report. The car ahead of him was blue. He flipped on his sirens. The driver was a black man in his 20s, trembling as he rolled down his window. "Sir, license and registration, please." H's voice was polite, but his hand hovered near his holster. The man fumbled for his wallet, and H leaned in, nostrils flaring. "You smell like weed." The man stammered. I swear." Yanked him out of the car, slamming him against the hood. "Search warrant says we can seize vehicles linked to drug activity. You're coming with me." The man's protest faded as H cuffed him, his face pressed to the hot metal. By sundown, the man was booked for possession, trace amounts found in a hidden compartment. H's report called it a major bust. His captain patted his back. "Good work, H." But across town, C watched the news on her laptop, jaw tight. Another viral video. The same blue sedan, the same trembling driver. She recognized the cop's build, the way he stood too close, too aggressive. Not her case, but it reminded her why she'd taken this job. That night at the docks, she met her contact, a nervous informant with a tip about a warehouse deal gone south. They spoke in shadows, exchanging whispers and photos. C scribbled notes, her mind racing. Back at the station, H filled out paperwork, sipping stale coffee. A younger officer asked, "Why'd you pull him over? The plate wasn't even close." H shrugged. Gut feeling. You learn to trust it. The next morning, the city woke to its usual rhythm. Kids walked to school, buses rumbled, and the sun peeked through smog. But somewhere a storm was brewing. A collision of paths that would shake the ground. C pulled into a gas station, refueling before a long day. H patrolled nearby, scanning the streets for trouble. Their worlds hadn't touched yet, but the air felt charged like before a thunderstorm. And then it happened. A call came in. Suspicious vehicle near Maple Grove. Drivers acting erratic. C's sedan rolled past a flickering traffic light. His cruiser turned the corner. 2 lives, 2 beliefs, 2 truths. 1 intersection, 1 moment, and everything would change. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement as Officer H's cruiser rolled down Maple Grove Street. His eyes scanned the road ahead, fingers tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm of the radio, a low hum of classic rock. A flicker of movement caught his attention. A sedan pulling into a gas station, its driver stepping out to stretch. H slowed, squinting. The car was blue. The description from dispatch had been vague, but his gut tightened anyway. Gut feelings saved lives, he told himself. Inside the sedan, Agent C adjusted her cardigan, glancing at her phone. Her contact's message lingered. Warehouse deal went sideways. Need eyes on it ASAP. She'd been running on 4 hours of sleep, her mind racing with details about the supremacist group's next move. But first, gas. She stepped out, the heat of the day clinging to her skin, and reached for her wallet. H's cruiser pulled behind, her red and blue lights slicing through the afternoon haze. His voice crackled through the speaker. "License and registration, please." C froze for half a second, then turned slowly. Her training kicked in, calm, controlled. She kept her hands visible, reaching for her wallet with deliberate care. "Of course," she said, pulling out her ID. "Let me just... Don't move!" H barked, hand hovering near his holster. His eyes darted to her bag slung over her shoulder, the way she shifted her weight. Suspicion coiled in his chest. Too calm, he thought. Too rehearsed. "I'm not moving," C replied, voice steady but firm. She held up her license, her badge tucked safely in her purse. "You're making this uncomfortable." H's jaw clenched. He'd heard that line before from thugs who thought they could talk their way out of trouble. "Step out of the car," he ordered. She complied, hands raised slightly, eyes locked on his. "Officer, I'm just filling up. This isn't necessary." "As if you're hiding something." He grabbed her arm, yanking her away from the car. A bystander nearby paused mid-step, phone already recording. C stumbled but steadied herself. "You're overreacting," she said, keeping her voice low. "I'm not resisting. Let go of my arm." "Where's your registration?" H ignored, her yanking open the driver's door. "In the glove compartment," she said, nodding toward the car. "But I'd prefer you didn't." He cut her off, rifling through papers. His fingers brushed her bag and he froze. Baggy pockets. He thought, drugs, weapons. His pulse spiked. "What's in the bag?" "My stuff," she said flatly. "Personal items." "Empty it. Now." "I don't think so," she said, her tone hardening. "You don't have a warrant." H's grip tightened on her arm. "You want to play games? Fine." He yanked her toward the back of the car, shoving her against the trunk. "You're under arrest." "Wait. Stop." C's voice rose, panic cracking her composure. "Listen to me. I'm an agent. FBI." H scoffed. "Prove it." "I have. A badge in my purse. Check it." "Hands where I can see 'em," he snapped, ignoring her plea. A crowd had gathered now, dozens of phones raised, lenses zooming in. Someone shouted, "She said she's FBI, man." But H was deaf to everything. except the roaring in his ears. Control the situation. Control the situation. C's heart pounded. She'd trained for this, de-escalation, compliance, but the fear was primal. Her instincts screamed, move, defend. She stepped back, hands still raised. "I'm not a threat," she said, voice trembling. "Please, just..." A misstep. Her heel caught the curb and she stumbled. H saw it differently. A lunge. A threat. "Drop," he roared. She didn't. 3 shots split the air. The first grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways. The second struck her torso, crumpling her to the ground. The third missed, punching into the asphalt. Silence. Then screams. The bystander video showed it all. The woman crumpled on the ground, H's gun still raised, his face pale. Someone yelled. She was unarmed. Another sobbed. "Oh my God. She's bleeding." H stood frozen, the weight of the moment crashing over him. His hands shook. She moved. She didn't obey, but the words felt hollow. C gasped for breath, clutching her side. Blood seeped between her fingers. Her vision blurred, the sky above a smear of gray and gold. Not here. Not like this. Sirens wailed in the distance. A woman in the crowd dropped, to her knees beside C, pressing a jacket to the wound. "Stay with us," she whispered. H holstered his weapon, staring at the crimson on his shirt. His radio crackled. "Units to Maple Grove and 10th. Officer-involved shooting." The world tilted. He'd done this. Back at the station, his captain would later say, "He panicked. It happens." But here, now, H felt only the weight of his own choices. By the time the ambulance arrived, C's breathing was shallow. The crowd's murmurs swelled into a chant, "Justice, justice, justice." That night, the video spread like wildfire. Headlines blared, "Woman shot during routine stop. Was she FBI?" Commenters argued, "Cop protecting the streets." Another black life lost to hate. In the hospital, surgeons fought to save C's life. A nurse found the badge in her purse, tucked beside her journal. The FBI was called. By dawn, H sat in an interrogation room, his uniform wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. His union rep assured him, "We'll say you feared for your life." But H couldn't stop replaying her words. "I'm an agent. FBI." Why hadn't he checked? Across town, C's handler stared at the hospital TV, fists clenched. "This isn't just her fight anymore," he muttered. "It's everyone's." The city simmered, waiting, and the world watched. The hospital buzzed with the kind of frantic energy that only emergencies could create. Nurses darted down hallways, phones rang nonstop, and the smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. In the trauma room, Agent C lay motionless on the table, her blood soaking through the sheets. Surgeons worked in silence, their faces tense, hands moving with practiced urgency. A heart monitor beeped steadily, then flatlined. A nurse shouted, "Charging to 200!" The machine buzzed. Her body jolted. The beeping returned, faint but rhythmic. Outside, the waiting room swelled with people. A man in a wrinkled suit paced near the vending machines, clutching a leather folder labeled FBI. His jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. Across the room, a woman in a floral dress clutched a rosary, whispering prayers. A teenager slumped in a chair, staring at the floor, his phone screen glowing with comments from strangers. Why'd she run? Cop was scared. Happens all the time. He deleted the app, fists trembling. By dawn, the world knew. Video clips flooded social media, grainy, shaky, but undeniable. Officer H's voice boomed through speakers. "Hands where I can see 'em." Agent C's calm reply, "I'm an agent, FBI." Then the shots. 3 pops, sharp as firecrackers. The crowd's screams. The hashtag #WowJusticeFork trended by breakfast. At the police station, Officer H sat in a cold interrogation room, his hands folded on the table. His union rep, a broad-shouldered man with a salt-and-pepper beard, leaned back in his chair. "You did what you thought was right," he said, voice low. They'll spin this, but we'll say you feared for your life, that's all you need. H didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on a stain on the table, a coffee ring, faded and cracked. He remembered the weight of the gun, the way his finger had twitched. The look on her face when she said FBI. Why hadn't he checked? Across town, the FBI's regional office was chaos. Phones rang off the hook. Agents crowded around a screen, replaying the video. A woman with silver hair and a sharp stare slammed her fist on the desk. This isn't just about her, she growled. It's about every person who thinks they're above the law. She grabbed her coat. Get me the mayor, get me the press, get me justice. By noon, the mayor's office released a statement. We await the findings of a full investigation. The phrase felt like a shield, polished and hollow. Protests erupted downtown. Marchers held signs. Protect, don't shoot. No more lies. A megaphone echoed. She was one of their heroes. If this happened to her, who's safe? Inside, the hospital agency's handler sat beside her bed. Her breathing was shallow, tubes snaking from her arms. He opened her leather journal, flipping through pages of neat handwriting. Notes about a warehouse, a list of names, a sketch of a symbol, a serpent coiled around a sword. The supremacist group's emblem. He closed the book gently. You did your job, he whispered. Now let us do ours. Back at the station, investigators combed through Officer H's phone. Texts lit up the screen. Memes of black stereotypes, rants about thugs taking over the streets, a message to his brother. These radicals think they're untouchable. Wait till they meet someone like me. A detective frowned. He targeted her. Another nodded. We've got motive, bias, intent. The union rep's voice crackled through a conference call. We're sticking to the fear angle. Don't let them paint him as a racist. But the video told a different story. A bystander's footage showed Agent C's purse on the ground, the badge glinting beside it. Another clip zoomed in on Officer H's face after the shot. No panic, just cold calculation. Comments flooded.
And he didn't care who she was. This is why we don't trust cops. At the hospital, Agent C's condition stabilized. Her handler met with reporters holding up her badge. She was doing her job, he said, voice cracking. She
didn't deserve this, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Will the FBI press charges? Was this political? He ignored them, turning to the crowd. This isn't just about her. It's about the system that let this happen. That night, Officer H sat in his cell. His wife visited, her face pale. They'll fix this, she said, gripping his hand. You're a good man. He didn't answer. The next morning, investigators pulled up to his house. They found his collection of guns, polished and loaded, and a notebook filled with rants. The country's rotting. Someone has to clean it up. By evening, the DA announced charges: attempted murder, civil rights violations, obstruction. Officer H's union rep grimaced. They're making an example out of him, he muttered. But the FBI wasn't done. They released a statement. Evidence shows the officer searched the victim's car for drugs after shooting her. No contraband was found. The backlash was instant. Protesters surrounded the station chanting, "He shot her, then lied." A reporter asked the union rep, "Did he try to cover this up?" He shrugged. Too early to say. Agent C's handler stood on the hospital steps, addressing cameras. She survived because of her strength, he said. But this isn't about survival. It's about accountability. Inside her room, Agent C stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, landing on the badge resting on her nightstand. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Across the city, Officer H sat in his cell, staring at the concrete wall. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he'd done, not as a cop, but as a man who'd chosen hate over truth. The world watched, waiting, and the story kept unfolding. The courtroom buzzed like a trapped wasp. Lawyers shuffled papers, reporters scribbled notes, and the crowd shifted in wooden pews, eyes darting between the defendant's table and the jury box. Officer H sat stiff-backed, his suit too crisp, his hands clasped. His union rep leaned close, muttering, "Stick to the plan. Fear for your life. Don't let them rattle you." Across the aisle, Agent C's handler adjusted his tie, jaw tight. Beside him sat a woman in a sharp blazer, lead, prosecutor, voice like steel. She glanced at her notes, then at the jury. 6 men, 6 women, faces carved from doubt and curiosity. The judge rapped his gavel. "We are here to determine the facts. No outbursts. No assumptions." The prosecutor stood first. Her voice cut through the air. This wasn't a split-second mistake, this was a choice. She turned to the jury, holding up a tablet. "You'll see video, text messages, proof that Officer H didn't just fear for his life. He hunted for reasons to justify it." Officer H's lawyer scoffed. She reached for her bag. He had no way of knowing she was FBI. He spread his arms. A badge in her purse doesn't change what he saw. A woman who didn't obey, who didn't move fast enough. Officers make calls in seconds. "You think you'd do better?" The crowd murmured. The judge silenced them with a glare. First witness. The bystander who filmed the shooting. A young woman with tired eyes. She played the video again. Gas station asphalt. C's steady voice. "I'm an agent." "FBI!" The shots. The blood. The lawyer grilled her. Did she move? Did she lunge? She shook her head. She stumbled. That's it. Next. The FBI's forensic expert. Charts filled the screen. Trajectories of bullets. Maps of the scene. "First shot grazed her shoulder," he explained. "Second hit her torso. She was retreating." The lawyer snapped, "You weren't there. You don't know what he saw." The expert didn't flinch. "I know what the bullets say." Then came the texts. The screen lit up with messages from Officer H's phone, memes of black stereotypes, rants about thugs taking over. A message to his brother. "These radicals think they're untouchable. Wait till they meet someone like me." The prosecutor stepped forward. This wasn't about safety, it was about control. She paused, letting the words sink in. He didn't shoot a suspect. He shot a threat to his pride. "Officer." His lawyer jumped up. "Speculation. He's being punished for his thoughts, not his actions." The judge frowned. "Jurors will disregard the last statement." Agent C's handler took the stand. He described her work, how she'd infiltrated white supremacist groups, how she'd risked her life to stop attacks. "She didn't hate cops," he said. "She was one of the good ones." The lawyer sneered. "She's FBI. She knew the risks. She should have handled the situation better." "She did everything right," the handler fired back. "He's the one who failed." Officer H shifted in his seat. His eyes flicked to the jury. One woman frowned. A man rubbed his chin. The final witness, Agent C herself. She walked in slowly, arm in a sling, face pale but sharp. The room tensed. She sat gripping the stand like an anchor. The prosecutor asked gently, "Tell us what happened?" C's voice was steady but quiet. "I heard the sirens. I pulled over. I followed the rules." She paused, throat tight. "I told him who I was. He didn't listen." "Why do you think he shot you?" "He didn't see an agent. He saw a black woman who didn't obey fast enough." Her eyes locked onto Officer H. "He prioritized fear over truth," the lawyer cut in. "You hesitated. You didn't hand him your badge right away. Doesn't that prove—" "No," she interrupted. "It proves he didn't ask for it." Silence. The lawyer had no reply. Closing arguments. The prosecutor paced, voice rising. This wasn't about a badge, it was about bias. He didn't just break the law, he twisted it to fit his hate. She pointed at Officer H. He gets to decide who lives, who dies. That's not justice. That's tyranny. The defense begged for mercy. He's a man who made a mistake, a tragic, irreversible mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. The judge dismissed the jury. The crowd held its breath. Hours passed. The courtroom emptied, filled, emptied again. Reporters filed updates. Protesters chanted outside, "Justice, justice." At dusk, the verdict arrived. The judge's voice echoed. Count 1, attempted murder. Guilty. Count 2, civil rights violations. Guilty. Count 3, obstruction. Guilty. Gasps. Officer H's wife clutched her chest. His lawyer whispered, "Appeal. We'll appeal." Agent C stood, swaying slightly. The prosecutor shook her hand. "It's not enough," she muttered, "but it's a start." Outside, the city erupted. Cheers, tears. Someone screamed, "Finally!" That night, Officer H sat in his cell staring at the wall. The weight of the verdict pressed down. His union rep visited, grim-faced. "They're calling for reforms, training, oversight." H didn't respond. He kept seeing her face, the moment before the shot. "I'm an agent, FBI." Agent C lay in her hospital bed, phone buzzing. Messages flooded in. "Proud of you. Stay strong." She scrolled past them, opening her journal. Her pen hovered, then wrote, "Justice isn't a verdict, it's a fight." The next morning, headlines blared. "Cop sentenced for shooting FBI agent." Editorials argued, was it fair? Too harsh? Not enough? The FBI released a statement. "This case exposes deeper failures. We demand change." The mayor's office announced new policies: implicit bias training, stricter oversight for officers with misconduct histories. Critics called it a publicity stunt. Supporters called it hope. Agent C's handler stood on the hospital steps addressing reporters. "She survived because of her strength," he said. "But this isn't about survival. It's about accountability." Inside her room, Agent C stared out the window. The city below pulsed with life. Cars honking, people moving, the world spinning. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Across town, Officer H sat in his cell, replaying the trial in his head. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he'd done, not as a cop, but as a man who'd chosen hate over truth. The world watched, waiting, and the story kept unfolding. The courtroom fell silent as the judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Officer H stood rigid, his hands cuffed in front of him, as the judge's voice echoed off the marble walls. "This case," the judge began, "is not just about a badge, a bullet, or a badge of courage. It's about the abuse of power, the cost of bias, and the lives shattered by both." His eyes scanned the room, landing on Officer H. "You were sworn to protect. Instead, you chose fear, prejudice, and violence. For that, you will answer." The sentence came down like a hammer. 35 years in prison. No parole for 25. The harshest penalty ever given for a case like this in the state. Officer H's union rep shot up from his seat, shouting, "Your Honor, this is excessive. He's a man who made a mistake." The judge silenced him with a glare. "A mistake?" he snapped. "A mistake is pulling the wrong trigger. This was a choice, a deliberate, malicious act." Across the aisle, Agent C sat motionless, her face unreadable. Her handler gripped her arm, his knuckles white. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others gasping. A reporter scribbled furiously, 35 years, cop who shot FBI agent gets record sentence." Outside the courthouse, the city buzzed. Protesters clashed with counter-demonstrators. One group chanted, "Justice served." The other shouted back, "Protect our protectors." A woman in a diner muttered to her waitress, "He's a cop. He shouldn't rot in jail for doing his should." At a bus stop, a teenager scrolled through tweets. 35 years, that's harsh. He deleted the post, guilt gnawing at him. Inside the hospital, Agent C watched the news on a small TV. Her shoulder ached, stitches pulling tight. The anchor droned. The officer's defense team plans to appeal, calling the sentence unjust. She snorted, switching off the screen. Her nurse walked in, adjusting her IV. "You okay?" the nurse asked. C nodded. It's a start. But deep down, she knew the sentence wasn't the end. It was a moment, a spark in a fire that had been burning for centuries. Officer H's cell was cold, the kind of chill that seeped into bones. He sat on the steel bed, staring at the wall. His wife had left him a voicemail. "They'll fix this, I promise." But he didn't believe her. The jury's faces haunted him. The woman who frowned when the texts played, the man who shook his head at the video. They'd seen him not as a cop, but as a man who'd let hate guide his hand. A guard clanged the bars. Mail. A thick envelope slid through. Inside, a letter from his son. "I don't know you anymore." H crumpled the paper, tossing it into the corner. His fingers twitched, itching for his gun, his badge, anything to feel like he mattered. But all he had was time, 35 years of it, to wonder how he'd ended up here. The FBI held a press conference the next day. Agent C's handler stood at the podium, flanked by agents in dark suits. "This case," he said, "exposes a rot that runs deeper than one officer's actions." He paused, letting the words settle. "We demand accountability, not just for her, but for every person who's been harmed by unchecked power." Reporters fired questions. Will the FBI push for policy changes? Is this about race? The handler ignored the second. "We're working with lawmakers to overhaul how officers are trained and monitored," he said. "Bias isn't a mistake. It's a flaw we must fix." That night, Agent C met with her team. They gathered in a dimly lit conference room, maps and files spread across the table. "The supremacist group's still out there," she said, her voice hoarse from painkillers. "We finish what I started." Her partner frowned. "You're not cleared for duty." "I'm alive," she snapped. "That's clearance enough." The Carter Doctrine hit headlines by week's end. Named after Agent C, it proposed sweeping reforms: mandatory bias audits for officers with misconduct histories, body cameras reviewed by independent panels, and stricter rules for use of force cases. Critics called it anti-cop. Supporters hailed it as long overdue. At a town hall meeting, a retired cop stood up, trembling. "I've seen good men lose their jobs over nothing. This'll make it worse." A black mother countered, voice shaking. "My son's alive because he followed every rule. But a badge doesn't make someone safe." The debate raged, but the doctrine gained traction. Lawmakers debated, lobbyists pushed back, but the momentum was real. Agent C returned to the community center where she'd volunteered before the shooting. Kids swarmed her, hugging her legs. "Ms. C!" they cheered. She winced, her wounds still fresh. A girl tugged her sleeve. "Did they catch the bad guy?" She nodded. "Yeah, but the real work's just starting." Later, she stood outside watching the sunset. Her phone buzzed, a text from her handler. "They're calling you a hero." She scoffed, typing back, "Heroes don't exist, just people who keep fighting." Officer H's first week in prison was a blur of threats and silence. Inmates spat at his feet, calling him cop killer. Guards ignored the taunts. At night, he lay awake, replaying the shooting. She moved. She didn't obey. But the words felt weaker now, hollowed out by the truth. A guard tossed a newspaper onto his cot. The headline screamed, "FBI agents, shooting sparks reform." Beneath it, a photo of Agent C smiling, surrounded by kids. He crumpled the paper, but her face lingered in his mind. Months passed. The Carter Doctrine became law in 3 states. Officer H's appeal was denied. Agent C testified before Congress, her voice steady. "This isn't about one cop. It's about a system that lets bias become a weapon." The world moved on, but the scars remained. One morning, Agent C stood at her window, watching the city wake up. A new case awaited her, a lead on the supremacist group. She grabbed her badge, hesitated, then tucked it into her pocket. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. The city changed after the trial, not all at once, but in little ways that added up like drops in a bucket. On street corners, people talked about the verdict over coffee and cigarettes. 35 years, a barista muttered to a customer. "He's not getting out till he's old." The customer nodded, stirring cream into her tea. "Maybe that'll make others think twice." Across town, a cop adjusted his rearview mirror. glancing at the protest signs taped to a storefront window. Justice isn't just for some. He frowned, wondering if he'd still have a job when the reforms hit. Agent C didn't wait for the reforms to start. She walked into the community center 3 months after the shooting, her shoulders still stiff, her steps slow but steady. Kids swarmed her, tugging at her coat like she'd never been gone. "Ms. C," a boy shouted. "You're back." She smiled, ruffling his hair. "Not forever," she said, "but enough." Inside, the director greeted her with a hug. "They've been asking about you every day," she whispered. "Told him you're a fighter." C rolled her eyes. "Don't make me a hero." "Too late," the director laughed. "You're their hero now." That afternoon, she sat in a circle with a dozen teenagers, listening to their stories. One girl described a traffic stop where an officer yelled at her uncle for driving while black. A boy talked about his brother locked up for a weed charge. C nodded, her jaw tight. She didn't offer easy answers, just listened, asked questions, and wrote down their words. Later, she'd send the notes to lawmakers pushing the Carter doctrine. By evening, she stood outside the center, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Her phone buzzed, a text from her handler. "Doctrine passed in 2 more states today. They're calling it your legacy." She scoffed, typing back, "Legacies don't matter. Action does." Officer H's cell was smaller than his old bathroom. Concrete walls, steel bed, a toilet that flushed louder than a jet engine. He'd learned to sleep through the noise, but not the memories. They haunted him. Agent C's voice, the crowd's screams, the judge's words. You chose fear, prejudice, and violence. His wife stopped visiting after 6 months. His son's letters turned cold, then stopped altogether. You did this, his ex-wife hissed during their final phone call. Not them. You. The other. Inmates kept their distance. Some called him cop killer under their breath. Others just stared like he was a ghost already. At night, he'd stare at the ceiling, replaying the shooting in his head. She moved. She didn't obey. But the excuses felt thinner now, worn out by time. One morning, a guard tossed a newspaper onto his cot. The headline read, FBI agents shooting sparks national reforms. Below it, a photo of Agent C shaking hands with lawmakers. H crumpled the paper, but her face lingered in his mind. The Carter Doctrine spread like wildfire. By the end of the year, 9 states had adopted parts of it. Police departments scrambled to train officers on implicit bias, body cameras, and de-escalation tactics. Some cops grumbled about politicians playing cop, but others admitted the rules made sense. If we'd had this years ago, a veteran officer told a reporter, maybe we'd have fewer funerals. At a training session in a suburban gym, instructors showed a video of Agent C's shooting. Officers watched in silence as the footage played. The gas station, the commands, the 3 shots. This, the instructor said, is what happens when bias takes control. He paused, letting the room squirm. Ask yourself, would I have done the same? A young cop raised his hand. What if she really was hiding something? Instructor shook his head. She told him who she was. He ignored her. That's not caution. That's arrogance. After class, the young cop sat alone in his car, replaying the lesson. He thought about his own stops, the way he'd sometimes tense up when pulling over black drivers. Is that me, he wondered. Am I that guy? He drove home quietly, the question gnawing at him. Agent C's days blurred into a routine of recovery and rebellion. Physical therapy sessions, FBI debriefings, congressional testimonies, late-night calls with activists drafting policy drafts. She hated the spotlight, hated the way reporters called her brave or inspiring. I just did my job, she'd mutter to her handler. But he'd shake his head. No, you fought for something bigger. One afternoon, she visited a high school to speak to a group of seniors. The gym smelled like sweat and floor polish. Students slouched in folding chairs, scrolling phones until she stepped up. I'm not here to tell you I'm a hero, she began. I'm here because I got lucky. I survived. Not everyone does. She paced the stage, her voice rising. You think this is about one cop? One shooting? It's about a system that lets people like him decide who lives and who dies. A girl raised her hand. What can we do? C smiled faintly. Start by asking questions. Why did he stop me? Why didn't he listen? And why does this keep happening? She pointed to the crowd. You're the ones who'll fix it. Don't wait for permission. After the talk, the girl approached her, clutching a notebook. I want to be a cop, she said nervously. Is that okay? C studied her face, so young, so full of doubt. Depends, she said. Why? To protect people, like you. C nodded. Then do it. But don't forget why you're there. Officer H's appeals dragged on, but the denials piled up like junk mail. His union rep stopped visiting. His lawyer gave up. By year 5, he'd stopped reading the news. Instead, he wrote letters. To victims, to families, to anyone who'd listen. I was wrong, he scribbled in shaky handwriting. I let hate guide me. I'm sorry. Most letters got returned unopened. One day, a guard handed him a package. Inside, a book titled The Anatomy of Bias. No note. H flipped through the pages, skimming studies on how fear shapes decisions. He read late into the night under the flickering light of his cell. Later, he started attending prison classes on psychology and ethics. The other inmates mocked him. Goody two-shoes, they sneered. But he didn't care. He needed to understand why he'd done it. Years passed. One morning, he woke to find a new inmate in the next cell. A kid barely 20 arrested for a robbery gone wrong. The kid spat at H's feet. Cop killer, he growled. H didn't flinch. You're right, he muttered. I deserve worse. The kid blinked, thrown off. Why'd you do it? H stared at the wall, his voice hollow. I thought I was protecting people. Turns out I was just scared. Agent C's final act came 5 years later. She'd retired from the FBI, trading suits for jeans and boots. Her new job? Running a nonprofit to mentor minority kids in STEM. STEM, she joked to her team. Because we're not just fighting bias, we're building a future without it. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd. Local leaders, parents, a marching band from the high school. When the mayor handed her the scissors, she hesitated. This isn't about me, she said. It's about them. She nodded toward the kids, their faces lit with curiosity. After the ceremony, she stood alone by the parking lot watching the sunset. Her phone buzzed, a news alert. Carter Doctrine adopted nationwide. She smiled, slipping the phone into her pocket. That night, she got a letter. No return address. Inside, a single page. Ms. C, I'm a cop now. I think about you every time I pull someone over. Thank you for making me ask the hard questions. You're why I'm here. She read it twice, then tucked it into her journal. On the cover, she'd written a quote years ago. Justice is a seed. Water it or it dies. She'd watered hers. Now it was someone else's turn. Officer H died in prison at 68. Heart attack. The guards found him slumped over his cot, a book open on his lap. How to be an anti-racist. His funeral was small. Only his ex-wife and son showed up. As the coffin lowered, his son glanced at the crowd of strangers and wondered, who was he? Later, he found a box in his father's cell. Inside, stacks of letters and a handwritten note. To whoever reads this, don't be like me. Fear destroys. Truth saves. The son kept the note. The letters, he burned. The city kept moving. Protests came and went. Reforms stalled, then surged. But in a corner of the east side, a statue rose near the community center. A woman in a cardigan, arms outstretched, holding a badge in one hand and an olive branch in the other. Kids climbed the base, whispering her name like a secret. Tourists snapped photos asking, who is she? An old man nearby sold postcards. She's the one who made them listen, he'd say. And somewhere, a cop watched the statue, his hand hovering near his holster. Then he let go, walking away.